Okay, let's just do a quick test to see if everything works as it should. Video. Yeah, we're live. Yeah, we're live. Okay, great. So let's make the stream larger. Let's mute the audio so I can check the chat easily. And let's present it. Okay, here we go. So, hello everyone, and welcome to the third and hopefully final part of my top 100 albums of all time. This time I'm going to go through number 15 to number 1. So it will most likely be done in less than an hour this time. It might be more because I might have like 30 minutes of things to say about one of the albums or something like that. But who knows? So without further ado, so to say, let's get right into it. This time I'm gonna go through the albums like one at a time, but without listing them off, because I did that last time. So all the way down to number 15. So here we go. Yeah, and that was the latest album on this list, the one that is going right here. So, without further ado, let's move on with the list. So, at number 15 we have Koen Hyakei, Anger Chispa. And this is definitely my favorite album from this amazing group from Japan. This was the first one I listened to. I remember it being introduced to me through a friend, through the song Ratims Fries. Which was just this really, really, really crazy, like jazzy rock tune. Hard to describe, but I fell in love with the tune, and after a while, I decided to listen to the entire album, to actually buy it from their Bandcamp and listen to it. Turns out that one song was just more awesome than the other, and every single song was incredible on the album. So this is definitely one of the best albums I know, and I think one of the things I like about it is that it's pretty minimal in its structure. It usually repeats the different melodies and patterns and the things it does. So in one way, it feels more. I think the structure is more interesting than their newest album, and not only the structure, but also the tone and the improvisation. I guess it's less accessible than the first album, and my favorite tune, as is mentioned here, is Quiven Vrastor, which is like it's good because it has like some folky melodies, but then it just flips out, and I think it has the best melodies on the album, and I don't know. This is basically, it's progressive rock taken to its logical extreme, and that's, I think, the main reason why I think Koen Hyakei is such a good group. They inherited what Magma used to do with like their opera singing and their insane riffs and things, but they took it even further to make something, make the shape of Jules to come, so to speak. It's like an Ornette Coleman thing, but with Jules instead of jazz. And yeah, it's just a really, really fucking amazing album that has accompanied me through many different occasions on the job before, when I delivered mail. That is, I have discussed that a couple of times before. But the thing about the job is that I listen to a lot of music while on it, and usually my favorite albums. And this became one of them as a result, because I just never got tired of it. I could listen to it on day in, day out, and it's such an it's really, really good. I also like the album cover a lot. I have actually a poster of it, of this one, which was included when I bought their latest album on vinyl. But yeah, this is definitely worth checking out, and I recommend you listen to it as soon as possible. So, moving on, we have at number 14, Gridlink, Amber Gray. Holy fucking shit, this album. My first introduction to it was that I have a friend who wanted to introduce me to grindcore, so they made a list of a lot of good grindcore albums that I should listen to. So one day at work I decided to, why not just listen to it. So the first album that came was Nails on Silent Death, which is another incredible album. It's not like a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, but still a really, really solid album, which was then followed by Wormrot's Voices. And Wormrot is like this really, really incredible. I forget. I discussed Wormrot last week, or not last week, but yesterday. I discussed Wormrot's album earlier, so I don't really have to go into it. But that was where I was introduced to it. But I guess that album didn't click as fast. What happened then was that the Nasum album came, which I was pretty underwhelmed by, to be honest, even though Nasum is like one of the most famous groups in grindcore. But after that, I got punched in the ear like immediately by Gridlink's the first tune on this album, Amber Gray, and the first thing that struck me was the insane speed played. And most of the grindcore is played at like most of the grindcore earlier that I listened to was played at like 200 BPM or like 210, like, or something like that. This one was like this. It's just staggeringly insane speed. It's completely unbelievable how good the drummer is on this album. But I think the main reason why this is my absolute favorite album in the grindcore genre is, first of all, its length definitely helps. It's 11 minutes long, which makes it, I think, the shortest album I've ever listened to. So that's another thing to add to the list of unique things about this list. It has the longest album I've ever listened to and the shortest album I've ever listened to, which is Amber Gray and Hio Kaidan's The Noise. But I think the main reason is the vocals, because John Chang, I've discussed him a bit earlier on one of my other top 100 videos where I discussed Discordance Axis, if I remember correctly. And he just slays these vocals. His screams are unlike anything I've ever heard, and he is easily like my top 5 vocalists. And that's actually the reason why the Genova is my favorite tune on this album. I remember a YouTube comment a while ago on one of the videos that said that Genova made the commenter's throat become sore just by the sound of his screaming, and I can definitely agree with that. It's like the shortest album you've heard is 1 minute long. Well, technically the shortest album I've heard is the world's shortest album, which is like, it's less than 1 minute long. It's the Earache record compilation of the shortest grindcore tunes ever made. But I don't really count that one. I think this one is more countable, so to speak. But in the Genova, he does a scream when the guitars and the bass is playing, and that scream, like, it sounds like he's destroying his voice, and it's one of the most amazing moments in the entirety of grindcore. And another moment worth discussing is the transition between the first tune, Amber Grey, and the second tune, I think it was called 5 Miles Below Sea or something. Because when that that's just so amazing, because it like takes a break, and then it starts up again with another intense scream. But the reason I think the length works so well for this album is that it feels like a coherent project, but the songs are still separated. It feels like a full-length album, even though it's 11 minutes long. I also absolutely love the album picture. It's actually quite the main figure on the album picture is actually quite similar to the last one. Now that I think about it, but Black is the fastest tune on this album. It has like it has blast beats that are even faster than earlier albums. It's like I know I do interesting imitations of every single of songs. But that's literally how it sounds, and that's like I think it's up towards like 280 BPM or something. But this is just insanely good record, really worth checking out. Let's move on to the next. So at number 13 we have Swans. Public Castration is a Good Idea, which is probably my second favorite album by Swans. And I have categorized the genre as hell music, because that's literally what it is. This is hell music. If you thought the earlier Swans albums were bad, then you haven't listened to this one. This is one of the most like crushing albums that you could ever listen to, in my opinion. The first time listening to it was actually difficult, in my opinion, but then it got easier and easier, to the point that it became just like an experience to listen to. A fun story about this one is I heard of a guy who played this record after having bought it, and he played it, and he didn't know if it was like a 33 RPM or a 45 RPM vinyl. For those who don't know, vinyls can be 33 and 45 RPM, and 33 it's basically the speed of that the song is played at. 33 RPM means I think rotations per minute, if I remember correctly. And what this basically means is that if you play a 33 RPM vinyl on higher speed, it sounds like sped up and has like chipmunk voices and things like that. But what happened was basically that he played this record, and he thought when he turned it on, it said like, okay, this is probably a 45 RPM. This is a 45 RPM record. I have it was just way too slow, because he hadn't heard it before. So he put it on at 45, and he said like, okay, the speed sounds good. And then you heard Michael Gira's chipmunk vocals come in, and you realize that this record is so slow. It's like it's like less than a beat per second. It's insane how slow this record is, and I really think that adds to it, because it has these guitar slams that are super low, super dissonant. I don't think there is a semblance of a melody in this entire album. Maybe in Fool, but the melody is so low pitched. It's a piano pitched down, I think, that they are playing. And it's just Michael Gira like screaming, or not even screaming. It's like moaning and also screaming the different lyrics in these songs, and they are just crushing lyrics as well. I especially like this album's rendition of Anything for You and Coward, and obviously Another You, because Another You is one of my favorite Swans tunes. The beginning of Another You sounds like something otherworldly, like a factory or something, and then the tune kicks in, and you get like an even better version of what you got on Holy Money. And wow, This is also one of the records that I've listened to while delivering mail, and you really get this, like, this, I guess, anti-capitalist sentiment when you listen to it. You feel like you're being exploited and not earning as much money as you should be earning and things like that. So that's very interesting. The lyrics have like an effect on you while you're just working your ass off at the post office, or not really at the post office, even on the streets. That is. It's. I hope they will make an album like this again at some point, but I think it's highly unlikely, because Swans has gone in such a different direction, which I like that direction, obviously, but I kind of wish that some of their material would be as abrasive and insane as this, because there needs to be more music like this. I wouldn't even classify this as rock music. I would classify this as closer to noise in its style, that is. But yeah, it's extremely expensive on vinyl, as far as I know, but it's a great album, and it can actually be heard on both Spotify, and it can be bought on Bandcamp and things like that as well. So it's definitely worth checking out. Moving on. At number 12 we have Meshuggah Coloss, and this is my favorite album by Meshuggah. Meshuggah has for a long time been. It was for a long time my favorite group in metal, but I think recently they've been surpassed by Portal, because I think Portal's sound is more unique, I guess. But no matter how many albums Portal put out, I don't think they will ever beat this album. Meshuggah's Coloss is, frankly, one of the most, if not the most, well-crafted metal album I've ever listened to. Because it has such a huge amount of variety in the way it's structured, even though everything is made with Meshuggah's standard style, so to speak. But it's not really like that either, because there are some tunes that deviate from it on the album as well, like The Hurt That something. That song is like a really fast one. The Hurt That Finds You First is the name of the song. Because that song is a really fast one, and it doesn't really follow the same rhythmical structures that their songs usually do. But this is definitely the album that I come back to the most, because I think so many songs on it are just so good. The album starts off with I Am Colossus, which is this insanely slow tune, which I actually, now that I think about it, consider to be probably the worst on the album. It's not bad, but the other tunes just crush it, because after that tune is done, I really like it, but the other tunes are better. The Demon's Name is Surveillance kicks in, which is like this insanely fast double kick tune. It goes like with the guitars moving in like different rhythms in the background. And it has this really nice 3/4 feel as well. It's like a waltz tempo almost. It feels like you could, I don't know, dance a weird metal waltz to it. But after that, the best tune Meshuggah has ever made, in my opinion, comes, which is Do Not Look Down. Definitely the highlight of their career, in my opinion. That it's just an insanely good song. It has like the best groove, I think, in any metal song, and I cannot at any point, if any tried not to headbang a challenge on the YouTube, which I know is like in reality one of the most it's a really cringy thing, but if any of them would have Do Not Look Down, I would not be able to complete it, because that song is just, it's so groovy. And it has some of the best like vocal deliveries in Meshuggah's career as well. While I do prefer their older, Jens Kidman's older vocals, I think the ones on Do Not Look Down are extremely good as well, because his vocals have shifted. They used to be like They used to contain a lot of voice, but now they contain like more of a screaming style, if you know what I mean. Another cool highlight that isn't mentioned here is Marrow, which is actually a song that I had to get used to it more. It starts. It has like this really cool pattern that you lose count of when you listen to it. But that's an interesting thing with Meshuggah, because sometimes you lose count. You lose count and you can't really follow the rhythm. That happens sometimes. Most of the time it doesn't, but when it does happen, it doesn't really matter because the rhythms are so striking anyway. So you can headbang it to it anyways, so to say. And the best thing about this song is about Marrow, that is that it ends on. It ends after a while, and then there comes like a cadenza after that, where they just play this crushing riff until the end. And really, one cannot talk about this album without mentioning Demiurge, which is one of their most famous tunes. I think it's probably most some people's favorite Meshuggah tune, alongside like Bleed or something like that. And it contains some amazing riffs as well, even though it's by far the most standard tune on this album, because it's instead of being based on a weird rhythm or something, it's actually based on this. And I think that's actually the main reason why it has like more of a mainstream appeal than other Meshuggah tunes may have. Bleed, I know why, because Bleed sounds damn difficult and has a really catchy riff. But Demiurge, I think, is because of this reason that it's famous. I will say that the part where the guitar plays this riff, you know, do 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 do. I will say that part is like one of the best parts on this entire album. And I love that Thomas Hackett like slows down the drums on that part as well. He like plays it at half speed. It's so fucking good. This album is. I was lucky to, when I visited New York once, I was lucky to actually find this on vinyl, on black vinyl, and for a pretty good price as well. So now I own it, and I'm really happy about that. Behind the Sun is also a good one. It's a really slow one as well, and that brings me to the point of that this album has like I said, it has a lot of variation, but one of the ways that this manifests in is that the songs are like consistently based on a pattern of either being slower or being faster. We begin with the slow Colossus, we go to the really fast The Demon's Name is Surveillance, to the mid-tempo Do Not Look Down, which then goes down to the low slow Behind the Sun. And you know, most Meshuggah albums, or a lot of Meshuggah albums, have like a more like acoustic or a soft interlude tune. Destroy, Erase, Improve has Acid Plagiarity or whatever it was called. And this album has one of my favorites of these, which is called The Last Vigil, and it's the last tune on this album. I think that's the reason why I like it so much. It goes right after Demiurge, and then you have listened to the entire album, and you can have like 5 small minutes, or like 3 minutes, I think the song length is, to just contemplate over what you have just heard. I think that's amazing, and I think more albums should do that. Now let's move on to another album. So at number 11, I couldn't miss this album. It's Current 93, Thunder Perfect Mind. I was actually close to forgetting to have this album on this list, but I'm glad I remembered it finally, because this album is it's an interesting album because I listened to it once, and like just randomly, because it was recommended by a guy called Mike Seatown, a quite famous YouTuber, but because it was one of his favorite albums. I think the title was what was special to me. I think Thunder Perfect Mind is one of the best album titles I know. It just sounds so perfect, so to speak. It sounds it's a really really cool album title, and I don't know. I think what some people will dislike about this album is David Tibet's vocals, because they are very out there and he sounds almost like a lunatic, just rambling on about random things in these tunes. But I think that's actually one of the reasons why I like this album so much, because it does sound like a lunatic, and this combined with like tunes that sound like they're played like around a bonfire in a medieval wood or in the medieval woods or something, that gives this album a very old feeling, and it's a very different feeling from other Current 93 albums. I have a special plan for this world, which as a project I consider to be better than this, but I can't really mention it on the albums list because it's more of an EP than an album. Maybe I will do a top 50 EPs or something at some point, and then I will definitely talk about I have a special plan for this world. But this just feels very different, even to their other neofolk sounds. Earlier neofolk stuff I don't like as much as this one, and this is definitely the best neofolk album I've ever listened to. But enough talk about like the background and the album sound and things like that. Let's get into the songs. The first song I've mentioned as my favorite is In the Heart of the Woods and What I Found There, which it just has the most catchy guitar playing in like all of eternity. One thing that's really striking about this album as a whole is that it doesn't really feature drums at all. It's just acoustic I guess this could be taken out of context, because if I would describe this album as just sad, a guy singing sad songs with an acoustic guitar, you would think it was like an indie pop album or something, but this is just completely different to the indie pop genre. It's like, it's repetitive, but it's never boring, because of David Tibet's amazing all of the personality he puts into the lyrics. He's just such a strange fellow, so to speak. And In the Heart of the Woods and What I Found There is definitely one of the best songs, because it begins with a riff that is also played in the intro of the album, and it's great. The first tune that I would say is downright creepy or uncomfortable would be All the Stars Are Dead Now, though, which it starts with this jazz sample, which then fades to a really, really repetitive guitar melody with people chanting "Jesus kills Hitler" in the background, and then he just sings and sings, and he starts screaming how everything is dead, 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 and I don't know. I think to some people it will sound like silly, but I never found it silly. I found it to be very emotionally heavy, and it's overall one of the best tunes in Current 93's discography overall. But none of them, both of the tunes are amazing, but they can't really be compared to the amazing centerpiece of this album, which is the final big tune, Hitler as Kalki SDM, which is actually, he said that it's dedicated to his father who fought Hitler, and it was, the text is about the idea that one guy had a long time ago. A woman, I think it was, from Greece, who was like a neo-Nazi or something, who believed that Hitler was actually the death god who had been reincarnated to make the world end, and that's what he describes throughout the entire song. And it's played like that, and it has this improvisational electric guitar. Lil Pump is definitely number one. No, it's number 0. It's even better than number 1. But it has like these swirling electric guitars that are playing, while it's accompanied by a really good acoustic guitar line, and it's 16 minutes long, and it managed to be interesting for the entire 16 minutes. I am very happy that I decided to check out this album when I actually did it, and now we're getting into top 10. It's worth mentioning that from this point on, every single album left on this list is a 10 out of 10 in my opinion. So they could be exchanged amongst each other a bit, but they are like very close in quality. So let's move on to number 10. At number 10 we have Yamataka Eye and John Zorn. They're 50 10 squared, I think is the proper term for it. And as you see in my favorite tunes list, I have actually a different classification for. At earlier points, I marked my favorite tune on the album with an asterisk, but at this point, I've marked every tune with an asterisk and my favorite with 3, because just to point out how much I love these tunes. So this album is very interesting. What John Zorn did basically was that on his 50th anniversary, when he turned 50, he made like a big concert where he played. I think he played 10 different concerts in total, and this was the last one. That's why it's called 50 and then a 10 square. And it's a free improvisation set with Yamataka Eye and John Zorn. Yamataka Eye is like he is singing, and he is playing, doing electronics, while John Zorn is playing the saxophone, of course. I got introduced to this album in a store where I went to in New York, I think it's called Two Bridges, and if I remember correctly, it was on Lower Manhattan. I went there because I got recommended it as a good avant-garde store where they focused on avant-garde music and weird stuff. And they actually played this exact album in the store, and that's I couldn't stop myself. I listened to it and I just said, "Holy shit, this is amazing! What is this?" And they told me what it was, and I bought it. And I haven't regretted it ever since. Just absolutely slays most other free improvisational stuff I've heard. And the best thing is that it's like they do different stuff on different songs as well. You have like the first tune on the album, which is these electronic textures with John Zorn playing his saxophone very minimally before on top of it. But the best tune is definitely the second one, because it's based on like liquid sounds almost, and it's called Money, Sex, Trip, God, Love. It has like John Zorn is like he's playing on his saxophone, but it sounds like he's like blowing into it or something. It sounds like that or something like that. It's a really weird sound, and at the same time Yamataka Eye is doing these like sounds with his electronics, and some really squelchy water sounds. It's a damn cool tune, and I couldn't and this is definitely it's the perfect length as well. It's like 45 minutes, and just at the exact right time, you hear John Zorn call up a person for Big Muff Dive, the song, a guitarist who will play as well, and that adds to some of the live and human element of the album, I think. Microwavable Empty Highway is definitely also a song worth talking about, because it's like this silent jazz piece almost. It's definitely a lot quieter, and more reflective than other pieces on the album. Mm. But yeah, holy shit, this is really, really good. Moving on. At number 9, we have Deathspell Omega, Heracletus. Holy, this album overwhelmed me from the first second I listened to it. It was like I had been to a bar with a friend of mine. We had discussed some music and drinking a bit. Had some fun, and I was going home. So I put on this album because I thought this time I should listen to a metal album. So I did, and I got to the first tune, and I thought, like, man, this is really cool. This is pretty cool. And then Wings of Predation started, which is like the second tune, and holy shit, I got completely blown away. It's one of these albums where my hands and feet were like moving to try to imitate the blast beats that they are doing, because I was so like captured in the album that I couldn't stop just being influenced by it. And the album was so good that I took a detour on my way home just to be able to finish the album in time. Yeah, I think I'm talking a bit too loudly. Maybe I can move away a bit from the microphone like this. But is it ear raping you that much though? Too bad. I should plan this better next time, and I probably will. But I won't do this. I won't do this many more times. And maybe I will get a better microphone for the next time. Okay, what is it then? If it's not that it's a super loud sound. Is it other things? Aha, okay. Yeah, I know that. I don't really know why that is. I don't know why it's a weird sound in the background. I don't know. But I'm just gonna continue. I'm just gonna continue talking about the album. And it just continues. I think the reason why I like this album so much from the first second is that the guitar chords are extremely extremely dissonant, and the playing is like it's in a lot of different time signatures, but it never feels like it's constructed to be in specific time signatures. It just feels really good, and the drumming amazed me from the first second of the song, because it sounds so good alongside the riffs, and same with the vocals. It's just it overwhelmed me as an album, and I've listened to it many more times and gotten the same feeling out of it, so I just had to consider it a 10 out of 10. It's holy shit. Overwhelming stuff. Phosphine is another extremely good tune. It's sort of like Wings of Predation in its style, but it's even longer and more complex. But I definitely think Wings of Predation is the highlight of this album. The album ends with Apokatastasis Panton, which is it's a really emotionally weighted black metal tune. And if you haven't guessed, this is definitely my favorite black metal album of all time. It's just so cool. So, at number 8, we have Pink Floyd's The Wall. Now, I think there is some nostalgia linked to why I like this album so much. But even with that, I have listened to it so many times, and I find new things to enjoy about it all the time. I just think every single song on this album is an absolutely massive success. And they all add to the... I think the story is incredible. I think every song is incredible. I think some of them are even more incredible than others, like The Trial, for instance. But the basic thing about it is that it's so consistent. People always talk about how Yeah, Hey You and Comfortably Numb are really good, but there are so many filler tunes. I completely disagree. I think even the quote unquote filler tunes have so much to bring to the table, both story wise and music wise. I think, for instance, Nobody Home is one of the best tunes on the album, and def- uh, what should I say? Empty Spaces is one of my favorite tunes on the album, and that is what I think would traditionally be considered as. Uh, I think that is what would traditionally be considered as a filler tune, and people say that. Interestingly enough, I used to dislike Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 because it was so popular and got overplayed as a result, but I have actually grown to love it a lot again, just because of. I think it's such a well constructed disco styled tune, and I think the that's the main thing you could say about this entire album. It's just so extremely well structured. It sounds like every single detail on the album has been given thought and been able to and be able to evolve into something that is truly greater than its parts. The entire album, that is. You can hear that in how amazing the synth sound in Another Brick in the Wall Part 1. You can hear that in the guitar line of Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 that goes like. It's a small detail, but I think it adds so much, and I have always been very fond of extremely detailed music, and I think that's one of the reasons why Pink Floyd's The Wall appeals to me so much. Also, why most drum and bass appeals to me so much. It's this. It has been with me from the start, and I cannot thank it enough for that. So, at number 7, Evil Intent, Era of Diversion. Now this was is definitely the best drum and bass album of all time, and the interesting thing is that isn't even because of the drum and bass, because the drum and bass is god tier, it's top notch, it's some of the best drum and bass I've ever heard. But the best tunes on this album are the tunes that are not drum and bass. For instance, Awkward Rhythm of the Dance, which is this extremely glitchy, like almost 8-bit tune, and same with Double Glock, with it, which is like a straight up glitch tune. There are some IDM tunes. There's even a metal tune on this album, or like a punk metal styled tune, and there is a hip hop one as well, which is really really good. Or there are two in total. The foreword, the intro tune, which begins the entire album, uses a classical quote from the film Network. You know the one, I don't have to tell you things are bad. Everybody knows things are bad. The dollar buys a nickel's worth, banks are going bust, shopkeepers keep a gun in the counter, and so on. It's a classical quote, and it's used to great effect in this album to add to this this idea they are trying to build. Interestingly enough, I guess this album could be considered the "We Live in a Society" album of drum and bass, but I just find the quality of everything to be so high that I can't even be bothered by that. I mean, it's silly that they are sampling George Bush in the title tune, but it's used to such a great effect that I can't really combat it. It's catchy for a drum and bass album. It has a coherence because every single tune flows into each other, flows into the other tune, and it's just such a good experience to listen to. I wish more albums were like this one in the drum and bass genre. Nowadays drum and bass albums are more like they are simply drum and bass albums. while this is a drum and bass themed album with other tunes that complement this. But that's what I like about this. I also love the album picture. So, at number 6 we have Philip Glass, Koyanis Katsi, the soundtrack for one of my favorite films of all time, and probably the best minimalist music ever. This is another album that I've listened to for a long time. When I started to get into classical music again, after having listened to drum and bass for such a long time, this was definitely one of the albums that I returned to the quickest. And I'm very glad I did. It has, I've listened to it more times than I can count, and it fits the film perfectly. But I actually think it's even better at its own, because the thing is that it's such a perfect. In the film it captured everything so perfectly. So when you listen to this in your day-to-day life, like especially on the job, which I did a lot, I listened to this album I think every day for like a week once when I was there. Then this album becomes like a soundtrack for your life, because in the film they are just showing like images of things moving about, and the same thing can be said about your life, but it feels like your life is shaped by this music as well. The Grid, for instance, is a tune used to how do you say, it's a tune used to symbolize the concept of Koyanis Katsi, which is described on the album title, like a crazy life, a life in turmoil, or a state of life that calls for another way of living. I really felt that delivering mail when I listened to The Grid, because it's a tune that like it sounds like it's almost like a twisted minimalistic circus tune that just it becomes more and more intense throughout its entire 14-minute runtime. It's 21 minutes in the film. I actually think the main reason why I like this soundtrack more than the film is because this soundtrack version is the best recording of this album. I think it's way superior to the one that was used in the film, especially in my favorite tune on the album, which is Vessels. This song is so good that I actually arranged it for piano so that I would be able to play it, and I may post a video of that when I have learned it when I have properly learned it. But I think for the piano pieces I will be publishing some other pieces before that. That's part of my plan at least. So what makes Vessels so cool is that it has two different sections, so to speak, that are used next to each other and are perfectly transitioned between each other. And the whole song is based on this. I think technically The Grid is more complex and more interesting in its structure, because The Grid has like it changes rhythm, and it changes time signature a lot of times, but it's like it changes in something that feels like a pattern, and that can't really be said about Vessels. But what makes Vessels so cool is just that it feels so foreboding. It feels so, and it's also a choir piece, and I feel like it uses the choir in a better way than The Grid does. But Vessels is definitely a tune worth checking out. Same with Prophecies, which is the last tune of the album, and the one to end it all. It ties the whole thing together. The first one is called Koyanis Katsi, and it contains this melody and a really low bass singer is singing like Koyanis Katsi, but one octave even lower. And that's tied together in Prophecies, which is the end. But it contains a part before that, that is completely different to the earlier part. I especially like this version in the other soundtrack version of this album, even though I think that's ultimately less good. But I actually think Prophecy is better in the film because it's actually longer and gives even more time to every single section. But that's probably the only part of this album that I think that way about. So, just great album. I think it would be a great introduction to classical music as well, so if you've never listened to classical music, I would highly recommend listening to this album as an introduction. So, here we go. Oh boy, this album. Number 5 we have Orchid, Chaos Is Me, which is the best Screamo album, without a doubt. For a while I considered Dance Tonight, Revolution Tomorrow to be like a top 20 album, like a top 20 album of all time, but that was before I had heard Chaos Is Me. So I was listening to people who said like Chaos Is Me is amazing, it's like the best album by Orchid, and I was thinking, yeah, whatever, it's probably not as good as Dance Tonight, Revolution Tomorrow. But boy was I wrong. When I listened to this album, the first thing that hit me was this Yanis Xenakis sample that they are using in the first part of the that they are using in the first song, and it's a sample of Metastasis from Yanis Xenakis, and they are playing that, and then perfectly after that Le Désordre C'est Moi starts, and that's like it's the best opening tune I've ever heard. I cannot imagine a better way to open an album. It's absolutely insane, completely unbelievable. I still feel chills every time I listen to that song, because it's the ultimate Screamo tune. It's extremely energetic. It starts off with like over the top, enormous screaming. It has some of the best riffs I know, period. And it also has like a 7/4 part. It's incredibly fun to play on the drums as well. Actually a lot easier than other tunes, to be honest. But it's just an insane tune, and I don't think the album didn't really dip at any point after that either. I wouldn't say that the songs individually are as memorable as on Dance Tonight, Revolution Tomorrow, or as varied, but I don't think that really matters, because every single song is just so well constructed, and even though they are similar, I don't think it's a bad thing if songs are similar, but everything is based on good stuff, so to speak. Death of a Modernist is definitely another highlight on this album, which is like, it's just an insane tune. It just starts with this blast beat and just goes with it throughout its almost 2-minute runtime, which says a lot about the album. The whole album is 18 minutes long, but it feels very, very amazing to listen to, and you can get really exhausted by it as well. This is also one of those albums that I blasted all the time on the work while I worked at the post office. So yeah, if you like intense Screamo, or if you want to get into Screamo, which I know that Screamo as all the songs are highlights. I know that that Screamo turns people off because they usually associate Screamo with bands like Bring Me the Horizon or Bless the Fall. But I wouldn't really say that they are Screamo bands. I would say they are more metalcore bands. If you want to listen to, I don't want to sound like an elitist, but real Screamo, so to speak, then Orchid is a perfect introduction, and also the best band in the genre. One of my absolute favorite bands of all time, without a doubt. Moving on to number 4, we have Swans, To Be Kind. God damn, this album. For a long time I considered this to be the best album on earth. And I still consider it to be one of the best, but not really the best. And you will understand why after I have shown you the number 3, 2, and 1 spots on this list. So what makes this album so good? Well, it's basically a combination of everything I like about music in general. It has huge attention to detail. If you can listen to every single song and you can discover small things that they are doing and add into the song, like the way the guitar creepily plays in the background in Screenshot in the beginning, and how they are adding like small variations to the fills that they are doing, or adding a small bit of piano variation, and there is just so much. It's repetitive, but it's like so extremely textured in its repetitivity. And I will say, there is actually a reason why I typed out Bring the Sun as Bring the Sun and not as Bring the Sun / Toussaint Louverture, because I actually think Toussaint Louverture is one of the reasons why this album isn't as good as the other 3 albums. If that song didn't exist, but Bring the Sun was the only one instead on that part, then this album would easily be better than at least one of the other albums after this one. Because Bring the Sun is just, I think it's the most intense tune I've ever listened to in modern music. It has such a long build up, and what makes it incredible to me is that the build up just continues, and when you think it has reached its peak, it just continues even more. It even comes to a point where the drums speed up, but the song is continuing in the same tempo, and that's one of the most cathartic moments I've ever listened to in music. It's like the drums speed up from like just spamming rise, like it becomes faster, but the song is continuing on the same, and it's a surreal experience in how it's made, and that soon after that the whole build up drops. And sometimes I have actually questioned if I really like this album that much, because I didn't feel like listening to it and things like that. But then I put it on, and as soon as Bring the Sun comes on, I immediately become convinced that this is one of the greats. Then we can't mention this album without talking about Oxygen, which is another one of those extremely intense tunes. I don't want to use the word insane too much, so I prefer intense for this one. It's a 7-minute tune, but it manages to be more intense than some 20-minute tunes are in Swan's earlier discography. Oxygen is definitely a highlight of their career, in my opinion, because it has a brass ensemble that is extremely cool. I love everything that comes after he sings "I Steal All the Oxygen." After he has, because that's when all the brass kicks in, and the orchestra and everything plays on the highest volume, and he just starts screaming into the microphone, and it's absolutely incredible. My some people I've played it to hate it absolutely and think it's like nightmare music, but I think it's incredible. And then we come to Be Kind, which is the final song on the album. That's an absolutely crushing tune as well. Used to be my favorite on the album, before I considered it to be like a 10 out of 10, which I do now. And it's no secret why. It's just like the perfect way to end the album. And I love the way he's singing. There are millions and millions of stars in your eyes, like 4 times, and every time the instruments just grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And well, all the songs on this album is amazing, but the instruments just grow bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they just culminate in this gigantic final crushing moment of the album, which it's hard to describe how much I love this album, but you just go and listen to it. It's great. It's great. So, at number 3 we have Opeth, Blackwater Park. And this has just recently surpassed surpassed Swans to Be Kind, in my opinion, because this is just, I don't know how this could ever be topped in like modern music. Holy shit. I the first memory I have of this album is with the Leper Affinity, because I got recommended this album and I listened to the Leper Affinity, so I added it to my playlist because it sounded interesting. And then I listened to it after a while, and after a while it like got into my top 50 favorite tunes of all time. And when I did one of those lists a while ago on Spotify, and it's still one of the best metal tunes I know, but it's just barely beaten by the second one, which is called Bleak. Bleak contains like some of the best moments in music, period. And it's just a perfectly constructed 9-minute song. I especially like the part where the guitar kicks in after the acoustic part in the middle, and the 16 triplet bass in the and the 16 note bass, double bass in the end. I mean, it's not a 16 note triplet because that doesn't make any sense. And all the chords are so amazing. It's a melodic death metal album, and the melodies are so well made. They sound so beautiful, but they also sound so unique. It sounds almost like, because most melodic death metal albums have like these generic melodies, like which is, it's epic, but it's not really interesting in the same way that this is. This can have melodies that are like that don't really make sense to a traditional listener, so to speak, because they have like odd chords, and it seems like the album is a lot more influenced by jazz than it is by other kinds of music. The song I was singing just now was Only for the Weak by In Flames, by the way. And that's why I love this album so much. Another reason is I think Mikael Åkerfeldt's vocals on this album is the best vocals in metal music, period. He has the best singing and he has the best growling. The growling is insane. He just sounds so amazing, and there are so many moments where the growl just adds to the entire effect of the song and just makes it more amazing. For instance, when the final scream before the Leper Affinity goes back to its first part again, where it goes like and then it goes back to it just makes that moment so much heavier. And it one thing I noticed when recently listening to this album was that it seems like every single song is based on a different thing. The Leper Affinity seems to be all about the riff, because it has like, I think it has more than 8 different riffs in total that it's using throughout its entire almost 10-minute runtime. Bleak seems to be more of a melodically based song. And after that we actually have a really unique song, which is Harvest. And that song is also, it's more of an acoustic tune. And then we get to the Drapery Falls, and I have to talk about the Drapery Falls because that's a musical journey in and of itself. It goes like it goes from point A, and it goes all the way to Z, and then back to A again. I just love this fucking album. I was so happy when I found it on vinyl, in the same store that I found the Meshuggah album, by the way. It's amazing. Let's move on to number 2. So, we have Sir Gerard Schulte and the CSO. Mahler Symphony Number 2. Holy... This is one of those albums that I'm at a loss for words when describing. This it's like the emotional highlight of my life, without a doubt. I will say this, that this if this symphony was only the last movement, it would be number one without doubt. But let's go through this in order so that it doesn't get confusing. So Mahler's Symphony Number 2, it's obviously his second symphony. He wrote it because he was very, very scared of death. He basically wrote it because he wanted to cope with being able to. He wanted to be able to cope with that feeling, and that's definitely something you can hear throughout the music. The first movement is like it's almost an introduction to the theme. It's 20 minutes long. The first movement. It can be 24 if it's a slow recording. And it has all of these ideas there, and everything feels so extremely coherent. And I think that's one of the things about classical music that makes it very different from modern music, because people usually say that like classical music isn't objectively better than modern music or anything, and while I do agree with that, I do think that it's objectively more complex in most cases, because there's just so much going on. Every single second it's like meticulously composed. There is never a point where you get into a groove or something. It's just always always varied, always evolving, and ever changing. It's a bloody masterful music, and this is definitely one of the absolute highlights in my opinion. So the first movement goes on. The first movement is very dynamic. It goes from like really strong points to really weak, somber parts, and then it moves on. And one interesting thing is that it ends in a Beethoven way, so to speak, because Beethoven usually ends his symphonies by actually, what is. He actually usually ends his symphonies with a fake out, and then another fake out, and then he ends it like something really quiet. And Mahler does this. He like builds up to a huge finale, and then it becomes quiet, and then it comes in again, and then it like quiets down, and then suddenly an ending comes after like 4 minutes after that or something. It's really cool. So moving on to movement number 2, and movement number 2, I think I have heard it been described as his way to saying goodbye to the Wiener classicism, which is like the classical music style that influenced composers like Mozart and Beethoven, especially Beethoven. And you can definitely hear this because it's a lot more classical in its style. It doesn't really sound as romantic. Now the main reason why I like this part so much is because it contains a section where the string instruments are actually using a pizzicato section. You know how strings usually sound like you know how they usually sound like that. If they use pizzicato, they sound more like bum 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 dum 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 dum. You know how the double bass is an instrument often used in jazz music as the bass instrument, and when they do that, they usually use pizzicato. They usually play just plucking the strings instead of bowing them. But when you use a violin, you usually bow the instrument. That's what pizzicato is plucking the strings instead of bowing them. And this part contains a part where they use pizzicato on the string instruments in the main melody of this part, which was the melody that I just sang. And that's just amazing because it just sounds so cool. I don't know, it's amazing. And I think that the attention to detail is yet another reason why I like classical music so much. But moving on from part 2, we go to part 3. And part 3 is definitely where the work starts to swing up a lot and become and become even more incredible. Because this is basically like it's a really rhythmically moved movement. It's very based in its rhythm, which hasn't really been the case for the last two movements, because the second movement was like an andante really slow movement, and the first one was very fluctuating in its tempo, so to speak. But this one is very rhythmically driven, and it's really, really tense. It sounds it sounds like it's building up to something, but you're really unsure of what it's building up to. But then you finally find out it in the end, and it becomes this huge explosion of brass instruments and other things. Brass instruments, by the way, is one of the main reasons why I prefer this music over older stuff, because brass instruments weren't as developed at that point. And I really like that moment. And then it just calms down and moves on. Then we get to the fourth part, which is the shortest one so far. The first one is 20 minutes. The two middle parts are about 10 minutes each. They can be a little slower or faster depending on recording. But the fourth part is just 4 minutes. It's very, very, very short. And it's basically just a song. But it's such a perfect setup for the last movement, which is the fifth movement. And it's called Urlicht. And you sing it, and when it's done, I can't really comment much about it. I associate it a lot with the last movement. But I still like it very much. But the last movement is what I want to discuss, because it's completely unbelievable music. It's first of all, it's 34 minutes long. And it begins with the same enormous explosion that ended the third movement, but with like a brass melody on top playing this. And then it just calms down and becomes really quiet, starts building up. And I love all the melodies in this part so much, because they have like a modern edge to them, but they are also like based in this romanticism. You can really feel how musically classical music as a whole is evolving, but is also going back. I don't want to describe or I don't want to bore you with the details of the entire last movement, but I will say definitely that the last 10 minutes is, I can't even say it with this, it's the best music there is. There is nothing is better than the last 10 minutes of this symphony, because it starts with this quiet part that the choir is singing actually. It's like after all the instruments have done their things, and then it just starts building up towards the end, and the end is like it's the most emotional thing I've ever experienced with music. I can't help it. Single-handedly makes me cry every single time I listen to it. Now I'm talking about the last 4 minutes, because it builds up with the choir and the orchestra, and it comes into this incredible section where all the instruments come together, and there is even an organ in the background just laying down the chords. And it sounds so euphoric. It sounds so happy, but it's so happy that you just cry. And every single chord is like emphasized in a different manner. And like I said, it's just so euphoric. I don't want to repeat myself, but this part makes me so emotional every time I listen to it. You must listen to this piece to understand completely what I mean, which I hope you will, because it is musical perfection. I can't describe it in a different way. But there is actually one album that is even more consistent than this one, and that is. If you know me personally, you will already know what album this is. But at number 1 we have Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonics Les Sacres de Printemps by Igor Stravinsky. The best piece of music I know. This is, it's the most consistently perfect piece of music ever created. To quote myself. Holy shit. So, to give a little background history about this piece, it was created between the years 1911 and 1913 by Igor Stravinsky, one of the most famous modern classical composers of all time. And when it premiered, according to rumor, there was a huge riot. One of the most famous stories ever made is that because of the provocative style of the dance in this music, people became very upset. Because this was a really, really modern ballet for its time. But I would one of the reasons why I like this music is so much is, or why this is so perfect, is it's the most influential piece of music ever made, in my opinion. And let me explain my reasoning. Without this music, there would not be any progressive rock. There wouldn't be modern classical overall. I think most of the bands of this list wouldn't have existed without this music. It's so inspiring with everything it did for music. I mean, sure, disharmony and strange melodies existed way before this piece. Multi-harmony existed in some cases, but it was very rare. But there was no piece that successfully combined this use of weird time signatures, extremely rhythmically based structure, this enormous overhaul of the brass instrument section as a whole, and just having multiple pitches at the same time. So, going through this piece, it basically starts with this introduction for the whole orchestra. And this, I would draw a parallel between this and like nature waking up or something in the morning. Like, it starts like with a single bird singing, and then it's like everything is moving. It's definitely the most dissonant part of the entire piece. And then it moves on to like, and this is why it was so influential, because when you listen to the second part, you notice immediately how extremely rhythmically based it is. It's based on this like bum 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 bum. And that's extremely influential, because there haven't really been classical pieces that were rhythmically based in the same way as this. Because all of the instruments are like synced they are synced similarly to the and doing these weird time signatures and everything. And holy shit, the second part is so good, and it just continues to become better and better. They start to add more textures. The fourth part is one of the most interesting ones, because it shows one of his main techniques used for this piece, which is to use dissonance as an effect to emphasize chaos in his music. Because in the fourth part he starts like, he uses a melody which is really like beautiful, and then when that moves on and becomes a strong part, he like adds dissonance to it. He adds these colored notes at the bottom, which changes the entire thing, and it just makes the music crazy. And and then just flips. I would say that this is one of the few pieces of classical music that you could actually headbang to. It's the most intense piece of music in the classical music that I've experienced by far. And I always feel exhausted in all of the right ways after having listened to the entire work. It consists of two bigger parts and those smaller parts that I'm discussing at the moment. I know this piece by heart, and I think that's one of the reasons why I like it so much as well. I could hum the entire Rite of Spring right now if I wanted to, but I won't do that because that will bore you probably. So when we get to the second part, which I want to talk about, which is called The Sacrifice, because this whole piece is actually, it's a ballet based on an old ritualistic pagan pagan ritual where a virgin dances herself to death under the influence of the rest of the tribe, basically. And that's definitely what is heard in the second part. It starts with this. It starts by Stravinsky blowing our minds again, because before he showed us how you can use dissonance as an effect to make something more chaotic, more dramatic, and more like edgy, so to speak. But when the second part comes in, you hear him using the dissonance in a really quiet part. And holy shit, is it good. It's easily my favorite part of the piece. It's maybe my favorite part of the piece. Then he does those huge swells where to me it sounds almost like think of the piece from Tatooine in Star Wars, but actually good. Because the thing is that John Williams actually stole that melody from The Rite of Spring, funnily enough. And holy fuck, it just moves on from that. It has this really long, quiet part, which I think Disney put it quite well when they did something for it in Fantasia, because in Fantasia they actually made this an analogy for life evolving. It started really, really quietly, and then it like became stronger and stronger, and then it's like a dinosaur hunt at the end, where this like I think that part where it like starts evolving again, and this I think that part is probably one of the most influential parts ever for film music. And holy smokes, it just continues from there to be almost perfect. But one final thing I want to mention before I end this list is the final part of it, which is like the sacrifice itself, when she actually dances herself to death. Because one of the final parts of that contains the best music there is, by far, or not by far. I don't know. The thing about this piece and the last movement of Mahler's Second Symphony, which I mentioned before, is that the Rite of Spring and that last movement is so far beyond the other pieces that I have before this that it's not even funny. I don't even consider them to be in the same league. This album is like, if the other albums were a 10 out of 10s, this is an 11 out of 10. This is just... I almost had to reinvent my entire system of rating things just because of this album and the album before this. Holy shit. And then it just ends on a giant abstract chord that you can't even begin to decipher. If there was any point in history I wish to go back to, it would be to the premiere of The Rite of Spring. If there was any concert that I could be able to hear, it would be that. This work has simultaneously shown me how great music is, and also made me lose all my hope in ever finding something that is better than this. But I don't think I need to either, because I could listen to this for the rest of my life and never get tired of it. I think it's the most consistently perfect piece of music ever made. Thank you so much for watching. It has been very interesting to talk about these albums. It has also taken way longer than I thought it would take. But I think it has been worth it. I hope I haven't bored you at any point. I might have, because these videos are by nature less structured, because they are just simple streams. Would you be interested in seeing more of these lists? Or maybe some different streams? Maybe I can stream some piano practice, or playing some video games, or something like that, because I think that could be that could be quite a lot of fun, to be honest. Just streaming a bit. If you think that would be interesting, leave a comment or something like that. And if you do not think that, I will probably do it anyways. So, thanks to all y'all for watching, and I'll see you next time.